Welcome to Series 1, Episode 12 of the In Her Financial Shoes podcast. Welcome to the In Her Financial Shoes podcast with me, Catherine Morgan, founder of The Money Panel, helping you to get financially naked. Listen in each week where we talk about that taboo subject of money. Listen to brutally real-life stories, step into our guest shoes and be left feeling 100% confident and in control. Oh, and we hate financial jargon, so don't expect any here. Small steps, big wins, let's go. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. So I'm really excited to bring the last episode in Series 1 of the In Her Financial Shoes podcast to you today. And this particular show is going to be focused around the topic of financial well-being. Now, the person who I've invited on as a guest today is a gentleman called Chris Budd. Now, for those of you who haven't come across Chris is a pioneer, really, of financial well-being. We talk about how his own personal experience led him to write his own book called Financial Wellbeing, with all the proceeds going to a cancer charity. And we talk about some of the kind of crossroads, I guess, that he came to within his own life about how money is not just about money. Money is about how do we create happiness. And we create happiness by finding out what our true purpose is in life. So we kind of get into a couple of deep questions with Chris in this particular interview. We talk about, what makes you happy, what makes you unhappy. And Chris will share with us on the pod 5 stages of financial well-being. And those are captured in his book, Financial Wellbeing. So that's having a clear path, having control of your finances, being able to deal with financial shocks, having financial options, and gaining clarity so that you can then sort of look after your family and legacy in the future. And we talk through each of those 5 areas and how you can start to think about your own purpose in life and really what value does money create. And we also kind of refer back to a couple of the previous podcasts in this first series around philanthropy, around managing money, around kind of using different budgeting systems. All sorts of stuff comes out of this podcast interview. So I'm really excited to bring that to you today. Chris actually used to run his own financial planning practice called Ovation Finance. He has now sold that business to an employee ownership trust and has written another book about that called The Eternal Business. He also continues to write personal novels, and all of his books can be found on Amazon. I've also popped a link in the show notes to his books, and he's also made a couple of recommendations throughout this particular show of books that have inspired him throughout his life. He also runs the Financial Wellbeing podcast. So if you don't listen to that right now, then I would certainly recommend that you head over and hit the subscribe button. And Chris is also actually going to be running a financial wellbeing conference later this year. So I'm really looking forward to joining Chris on that particular day. So without further ado, I have a massive warm welcome to Chris Budd. So hi, Chris, and a massive welcome to the podcast today. How are you doing?
Hello, Catherine. I'm very good. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I actually tried to interview you last year, didn't I, when I was running my local radio show?
And the listeners got some very good music to listen to instead.
We did. I think we had some problems trying to get you dialed in, didn't we? We ended up just playing lots of your tracks. And so for those of you who do follow Chris on the likes of Twitter will know how much of a music fan Chris is.
Indeed.
We got into a music competition tweet fest, didn't we, a couple of weeks ago? So yeah, no, all good. I'm a great music fan myself. So, but also you're also a fellow podcaster, aren't you, Chris, yourself, with your own podcast? So I feel like I'm talking to one of the podcasting experts in our industry.
Well, I'm not sure I go that far, but I think if you come up to the 15-year-old me and tell me that when you were 51 you'd be a podcaster on your LinkedIn profile, I looked at you very strangely.
So, for those of my listeners today, Chris, that haven't heard of you, could you just start off by telling us a little bit more about yourself?
For the one or two that hasn't heard of me. Yeah, so
well, I appreciate that within the financial services industry, you're very well known for the work that you do around financial well-being. But of course, for some of my listeners who won't be in the internal profession, then it would be a pleasure to understand a bit more about what you do.
Of course. So I set up a financial planning company in 1998. Probably don't need to go back further than that. I actually sold it last year to an employee ownership trust, but that's another podcast conversation. A few years ago, I wrote a book called The Financial Wellbeing Book. All the proceeds go to a charity called the Penny Brohn Cancer Centre, and it was them that actually inspired the writing of the book. One of my lines I like to say when I do talks on financial wellbeing is I actually invented the expression financial well-being. It's just that a couple of other people had invented it before me. But I didn't know that, right? I didn't know that. So when I Googled it, I put because well-being was a big thing with the Penny Brohn Cancer Centre. And so when I Googled the expression, I thought, financial well-being, I could talk about that. Then I got that only two things came back. It was one of those Google searches, only two came back. Now, of course, it's absolutely everywhere, which is fantastic. That's me in a nutshell. I live in Somerset with my family. I write novels and I play the guitar. I love music and cricket. And there we go.
Fabulous. And actually, when you were saying about financial well-being, that's how I came across you originally. So I think it was 2016 when I came out of working in the banking sector, and I started to look at ways that I could really work with what represented me and my values and the way I wanted to work. And I started to look at things like financial coaching and well-being. That's how I came across you originally. So I bought your book 2 years ago on Amazon.
Wow, it works.
And I read it on holiday, and it was your book that I read that year amongst Paul Armson's book Enough and Carl Richards' book. And
well, that's heady company.
It was an interesting summer, but for me,
I want to say get a life, Catherine. A little bit of me wants to say get a life. To do that on holiday, come on, girl.
Well, what else was I going to do? Lying on my sunbed watching my kids play. But for me, I was stuck in this kind of mindset of I didn't want to work in an industry that just wanted to sell products, and I thought, there's got to be more to it than this. And it was when I started to uncover the likes of yourself and Paul Armson and some of the professionals in the financial services industry, that I thought, actually, these guys are talking about the kind of stuff that really resonates with me. And when I read your book, what I loved about your financial wellbeing book was, without this sounding negative, was the simplicity of it. It was so easy to read and implement, and I just absolutely loved it. So I really would love to share some of the teachings that you talk about in your book around the 5 steps and 5 stages of financial well-being.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But before we do that, Chris, what was it that initially inspired you to start writing about this, I guess, this concept, which at the time wasn't particularly well known or talked about?
I think there were two things. Firstly, many years of doing financial planning with people, I have helped a lot of people to realize that they already have enough. How much is enough is the question that I've been asking for 20 years. And when people find that actually they have enough for what they want, they realize they have options. And what happens is that I have discovered is that whenever people realize that they've got enough money to do the things that they want to do, the next thing that they do is they seek purpose. And that purpose generally comes in the form of helping other people. So that struck me that it isn't money that matters, it's purpose that matters. It's what we do that makes us happy. And so that's how I've been doing things for quite a long time. What then particularly triggered it was a drive with my wife, who had recently, my wife is a cancer nurse, so we've been around cancer and all that entails for 25 years. And she had just started doing 1 day a week at the Penny Brohn Cancer Centre. Everybody wants to look it up. Brohn is Brohn, amazing place. And she was telling me about the work that they do and about how it's all about that living well with cancer is their expression. So this idea that you hear sometimes, I'm going to beat cancer. Well, you can't actually. Ultimately, we're all going to die. So it's about living well with cancer and coming to terms with your illness and come to terms with life and not being stressed and eating well and health and all this kind of stuff. And I got excited when I was listening to this. I was really quite inspired. And I said, well, one of the big things that causes stress is worries about money. So maybe I could write a book to help people get less stressed about money. And in fact, I could call it How Financial Planning Can Help Prevent Cancer. And she looked at me and said, I don't think you're going to get away with that. That may have just been that one step too far, Chris. But the idea that how can we get less stressed by money? How can we focus on the things that make us happy? Money is a tool. Money is simply something that we use to help us do things. And many, many studies have shown that if you focus on the money itself, if you focus on stuff, then you will be less happy. Lots and lots of research proves that. If you keep going down this line, you end up being a Buddhist. And I've never seen a sad Buddhist.
No.
Have you?
A grumpy Buddhist, maybe.
Take your word for that. But there is something in all this stuff. There's a reason why there's an entire religion about not owning things. So that's down the end of the road. We'll take little steps to get there. But the idea that we've got to focus on the things that make us happy, not the things that we own, is what kind of started this. But it was from the Penny Brohn. It's why all the proceeds of the book, the podcast, the Financial Wellbeing Podcast, doesn't have proceeds. But if it did, they would go to Penny Brohn as well, because they were the ones that inspired the idea in the first place.
So why do people find it? Why do we focus on money as a physical object rather than what it can provide to us in our life? What's the challenge there, do you think?
Well, not all societies do. US, Australia and UK particularly have societies that focus that way, but Scandinavia, for example, is much less focused that way. So it's not automatic. I would suggest, and this maybe is getting a little bit left field, but I don't know. But I would suggest we have a society that has a vested interest in making us be interested in money, advertising, marketing. You don't ever see marketing that says buy this product, but only if you need it.
Wouldn't that be an interesting concept?
Yeah. The whole point of advertising is to make you feel that you are unhappy, so that you buy their product to replace the feeling of unhappiness. So, and we look at the TV programs, Dragon's Den, and things like Wolf of Wall Street and The Apprentice. They're all about respect goes to those who are rich. But I would suggest those who are rich are not necessarily those who are happy. So one of the questions that I often ask people when I do coaching is to say, what is your definition of success?
Great question.
So my personal definition of success is freedom of time, flexibility of time, being able to choose what I do during the day. That for me is important. But others may well see success by material possessions or the amount in their bank balance. But as I say, research shows that isn't actually making you happy.
Do you think some of that is also influenced, so not just from society, and I completely agree with you, I think consumerism and the way that, particularly with social media right now, the likes of Instagram, for example, is you load up Instagram and it's just a flurry of images about buy this, buy that, look at this car, look at this house, look at my life. And, and that concept of consumerism is hugely influential on how we make decisions about money. But also, do you think that there's any impact of how we've grown up with money? What was your kind of relationship with money like when you grew up?
I think I was an annoying little entrepreneur, actually. I remember, so my dad used to work for a pensions company called Target Life. I think I can admit to this now. It's been
we can edit this out if you like, Chris.
It's been some 36 years. I think I'm safe. We used to go to his office on a Saturday because the parking was in the middle of Bristol, so it was nice and easy. And we'd go into his office, which was this massive place, and we'd just run around having fun. And I used to go to the stationery cupboard and nick stuff. And
me too. I used to do that in my dad's office.
My dad did know about it, but I would then take this stuff and I'd take it to school and I'd sell it. So But here's an interesting one. Let's see if you can unpick the logic of this. So I remember Robert Kingston, there was his name, and he wanted a couple of binders that I had, right? And I said, and I was with my girlfriend at the time, so I must have been 16. And I said to Robert, yes, no problem, £1.50. Now, they're £3 in the school shop, right? So I'm undercutting. So Robert says, great, I'll have two. And my girlfriend at the time said, no, don't buy them from him. He gets them for free. And I've always wondered, why did she say that? Robert looked at her and went, well, yeah, but I'm getting them half the price of what we get elsewhere, so I don't care what he paid for them,
So he still bought them?
Yeah. But she just couldn't handle the fact that I was making some profit. Anyway.
Is that because you were being sneaky and because you stole them out the cupboard?
Well, I'll be honest about it. So, I wasn't. I would tell them where I got them from, But anyway, I always thought that was. I guess I don't know how that shaped my view of money, but it seems to have done.
Did you photocopy your face as well on the photocopier machine?
Yeah, my face, yes. Let's not go down that road. The other thing. The other thing that I would share with you that isn't an earliest memory, but is definitely the most defining thing that's happened to me around money is my father went bankrupt. So when I was mid-20s, I guess, my father, who was a financial advisor, this is in the early 1990s, when it was products and commission, that's the only way anybody did it, And he had a few good years. And then he had some very, very bad years, and he didn't tell anybody because he didn't want to worry us, but it ended up with him going bankrupt, lost the house, absolutely everything. And I was in the middle of that. Horrible experience. It affected me deeply, even to the extent that here we are some 25 years later, and I still feel myself constricting, And the phrase that I would use is, or that stuck in my head is, I decided I would never be a victim again, like my dad was. He got himself into a situation. He did spend his money on some fancy things. He didn't save enough, a little bit of his own fault. I don't think we can argue with that. A lot of it wasn't. But it changed him as a man. He was never the same person again. And I always vowed that I would never let something like that, if I could possibly help it, happen to me. So that's why I focused my financial planning on long-term relationships with people rather than trying to sell products back in 1998 when it was unheard of, So that definitely is the most defining thing that's ever happened to me around money, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And for sure that will have an impact, obviously, in terms of, or you've already explained, and how that's impacted on how you've made decisions then in your own business. And I think in reality, we are all human. We all have experiences, either personally or from those around us, of potentially times where we've not been able to have an element of control. And that lack of control can lead to scarcity around money. And of course, scarcity around money can lead to all sorts of challenges, like burying our heads in the sand, or conversely, can go in the alternative way where we try and control everything. And then it's very difficult when you're trying to build a business and you can't give away some of that control and some financial decisions. So often I've seen that with people who run their own businesses, and when they try to scale up, they find it very difficult because they can't give away that control. So I think some of these kind of early messages can have a huge impact on how we deal with money. And I guess kind of linking back into the work that you've done as a financial planner and building your practice, what kind of challenges have you sort of found with people in terms of how they plan financially? Because this is one area that I think, as an industry, we're starting to see this shift, aren't we, from people who want to be putting a really sound financial plan in place rather than us being focused on selling products. And the industry is starting to see that change.
Well, most of it.
Not as quickly as possible.
No, I mean, I've been doing talks at conferences on this for I don't know how many years, loads of years. The approach that I propose, I put forward, is coaching, then planning, then advice. So if we can define each of those, financial advice I define as being product or tax or pension technical knowledge related. Okay, very, very important, very important. But before you do that, you've got to know where you're aiming. What's the future you actually are trying to get to? So you therefore need financial planning before you need financial advice in order to determine what the future is going to look like, that you're then going to apply these investment principles and these tax advice to. But I would say a third of the market has now got that. No more than that, unfortunately. But a third of the market, which is still a lot of people, are doing that financial planning. What I suggest is that that's not gone far enough, because we should have coaching that comes before the planning, that comes before the advice. So what coaching does is it says to people, well, what future do you want to aim for? So to give you the example, somebody might come in to see you and they'll say, I've got 5 pensions, I want to retire at 65. And the advice person will say, great, we'll do a pension consolidation, here's the technical knowledge, investment portfolio, what's your risk, blah, 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 off we go. The planning person would say, well, let's see if you can afford to retire at 65. Let's put some cash flow forecasting in place. Let's just do a bit of maths, to see what the future, if it's actually affordable. The coaching person would say, how did you come up with 65? What happens the day after you've retired? You wake up, what are you going to do? What will your purpose be in retirement? Not what's your bucket list, because that's a finite thing. What's your purpose? What will bring you happiness? And so on and so on and so on. And when you get those unpacked, then you can do your planning to the future that you didn't know you wanted before you came in the room.
That's such a lovely description of it. And I love the way that focuses the mind on as you say, your purpose, rather than your list of, I want to go to America and India and Australia and all these different countries. That needs money to do those things, but it's not your purpose.
Yeah. I remember one lady who I said that question to, you wake up and you've now got nothing in front of you. What will you do during the day? So sit in the garden and read a book. And I said, okay, but when you finish that book, I'll read another book. Okay, well, in a year or two's time. No. You must understand. All I want to do is sit in the garden and read a book. I've thought about this a lot, and that is what I want to do. Fair enough.
What's the most unusual answer that you've had to that question? Putting you on the spot here, but have you had a really unusual one?
It's probably me, but I probably couldn't share it with you. Do you know what? I'm going to sidestep. I'm going to be a politician and share with you a different story about the one that I'll never forget. Okay, so because it changed my life. Paul was a solicitor, and this is quite a few years ago, and he had been running his practice for all his life, basically, pretty much. Struggled to get somebody to take it over, finally managed to, and I was helping him structure his retirement investments and pensions, etc. And I asked the question, so what will you do in retirement? And he said 2 things. He said, firstly, I will tour the world watching the England cricket team. I thought, yep, I'll be with you.
Nice.
And he said, the other one is I'm going to write poetry. And I said, so if I can ask a question, why have you not been writing poetry before? And he said this wonderful, wonderful phrase, which I find absolutely inspiring. He said, because you need fresh mental energy in order to write creatively. And a year or two later, that inspired me to take Wednesdays off work and to start writing novels. I published 2 novels, and I'm halfway through the third. And you need fresh mental energy. You need space to be able to write creatively. And that's my purpose. That was a big thing for me. To finish the story, a few weeks later, I went on holiday for 2 weeks. And when I came back, I had a message to call Paul, and he was in hospital. He had cancer, and he died a week later.
Oh, gosh. Wow.
So he never got to do those things. And that was another thing that inspired me to then say, do you know what? Stop thinking about, I used to write a lot as a younger man, got out the habit. Stop thinking about it. Actually do something about that.
Just do it. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And so that spurred you on then to create more time in your week, to take a whole day off. This is when you were running Ovation, was it?
About 8 years ago.
Wow, that's incredible.
And I still have Wednesdays off my writing day. They've been sacrosanct. They've fallen a little bit by the wayside recently with my new business, but I still try very, very hard, and I need it. I need to be doing that writing. It's important to me, and I've come to realize it's an important part of my nourishment.
I feel really moved by that story. I mean, personally, I've just written a chapter for a co-authored book, which landed in Amazon last week, and that book was a collaborative approach of 20 women writing a chapter around their own personal experience, not necessarily to do with money, but to do with what we would teach the younger generation. So if it was a 13, 14-year-old girl reading this book, what would we tell her about herself and self-worth and happiness? And when I was writing my chapter, I got to the end of my chapter and thought, I found it really therapeutic, first of all, writing about my own personal experience. My chapter was called The Emotional Spender, because my relationship with money has always been very emotional. I've always tried to control how I feel about my own confidence, and years of lack of body confidence and eating disorders and all of these things growing up. And that subsequently led me to have a really bad relationship with money. And so I would just overspend. I'd have no insight into what I was spending. I didn't care. As long as it made me feel better about myself, that was all that mattered. And it wasn't really until that summer, a couple of years ago, when I read your book, and I read a few other books that year, as we've just explained, and I sat back and thought, do you know what? This isn't what I want in my life. Like, what is the purpose of my life? What is my mission? What do I believe in? And that's what I've built my business around. So it's really interesting, isn't it, to think about, what is your purpose in life? What's going to give you not just financial well-being, but overall well-being?
But isn't it interesting that when you went for your search for purpose, you found it in helping other people?
Yeah. I always knew that. I always knew that working in the bank for nearly 20 years of helping people, I always knew that that's what I really enjoyed and what I was good at. But being in a bank environment, I felt like I wasn't being kind of recognized for that, because it was, if I didn't sell a product to that person I was helping, I wasn't doing a good job. And that was the disconnect for me. In some instances, in many instances, the work that I do as a financial coach, there's no product needed to help people. And that's why I love the work that you're, and I would say you're one of the early, inspiring organizations that worked around this principle of financial planning and financial coaching.
So the principle in the book that we use, and you say this all the time on the podcast, is financial well-being financial planning is really very simple. All you have to do is work out what you want from life and spend your money on that. And of course, that's incredibly hard, because you've got to work out what you want from life. But that might mean I'm spending my money on my future, bringing the future closer with savings and pensions, or it might be that there's something that you really need to do now. But the difficult thing is working out actually what makes you happy, what your purpose is. And I find some of this behavioral finance stuff fascinating in this area, because there's the conclusion. Greg Davis, who I'm sure you'll know, one of the foremost people in behavioral finance, when he was on our podcast, he concluded that we, for all the reasons that he'd explained, we are almost hardwired to make bad decisions about money. It's almost guaranteed that if we don't put any thought to it or get help, we will make a bad decision when it comes to money. For lots and lots and lots of reasons to do with present bias and all these different cognitive biases. And I used to smoke fags in my 20s, and in my late 20s, I gave up. And I found it quite easy to give up, because I saw an advert with John Cleese in which he said, when you give up smoking, it takes around about a month for the addictive element to leave your body. So within that period, it's not your fault. And once I knew that I wasn't battling my mind, I was battling a chemical in my body, which was on its way out, I suddenly found it easy. And I find money a bit like that. If I know that there's advertising trying to make me make bad decisions, if my cognitive biases are leaning me towards make bad decisions, I know I need help. And I know it's not my fault. So therefore I've got something to work out there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, in fact, we were talking about this last night. I was doing a free workshop online with a group of women, and we were talking about this concept of anchoring and how we anchor our decisions based on either a previous experience or a previous decision that we've made. And we look for ways to, to kind of reaffirm or reconfirm that is correct because it's happened before, or it's this kind of this behavioural bias of anchoring, and I guess linking that into financial well-being. I guess that, is there a challenge for some people that perhaps when they're trying to explore their purpose in life, how does somebody do that if they don't feel like they have purpose in life? When we talk about the link between well-being and mental illness, for example, that's not always easy for people, is it, to think about what is their purpose in life?
So let me tell you about a Harvard University study. This is a TED Talk that people can look up. Just type in Harvard University TED Talk happiness, or something that will get you to it, I'm sure.
Great, I'll pop a link in the show notes.
It's about 15 minutes long, and I'm going to spoil it for you now because I'm going to tell you what it says. So Harvard University started a study where they went to about 950 people. Half of them were Harvard students and half of them were from the poor area of Boston where Harvard University is. And they said to these 18-year-olds, what do you think will make you happy as you go through life? And they said, overwhelmingly, they answered money and fame. Those are the two, if you like, measures of success. They then went back every 2 years and interviewed them and said, are you happy now? And what is making you happy, or what is making you unhappy? And they carried on doing that for the last 75 years. Yeah, absolutely amazing. They've still got some people they're going back to, are still going. And overwhelmingly, what came out of that study is that, surprise, surprise, money and fame had no effect on people's happiness at all. But what did have a massive effect was the quality of their social contact. Not the quantity, the quality of their social contact. Even to the extent that people who reported loneliness died earlier. So there are 5 areas to well-being as a whole: career, social, financial, physical, and community. I take that from an excellent book called Wellbeing by Gallup. So that's not me saying this. This is Gallup's own surveys. The authors are Rath and Harter. If anybody wants to read that book, it's fabulous. And of the one of the things I'm always really, really keen to say is that it's not, don't just focus on your financial well-being. Don't just focus on your career well-being. It's how all these things interact that add together. It's how they mesh that builds the overall well-being. So it's the balance. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So if you've got somebody who's hugely focused on their career well-being, it might be that their family well-being and their social well-being is suffering. And their community well-being is suffering because they're spending so much time at work, So it's about a balance of these different things. But social well-being is the most important, is the biggest contributor. So if people want to work on their well-being, don't try and get more money. Work on your social. Yeah.
Make more friends.
Work on your social contact. So we try and get a bit practical with some of this stuff. So for example, I'll give you a perfect example, actually. My friend Jakob. So when I was 18, I did some traveling, went away on my own to Israel, and I met some wonderful people. And one of them was a guy called Jakob, who has the same birth date as me. We're born on the same day. And what's that phrase? Brother from another mother. We just become best friends. And he came to England for 3 summers. I spent a summer in Denmark. But then as the years went on, we lost contact. He won't mind me saying this, he's a lazy bugger. So he never got around to writing back, and I got fed up with sending letters. So we lost contact. And then through the mighty power of Facebook, about 5 years ago, we got in contact again. And I went over to Denmark with the family, and we all met him. And now we see each other regularly. I went to see a concert in Copenhagen a few weeks ago with him. That is a wonderful way for me to spend my money. because Jakob is a wonderful person. We're best mates again, and spending a bit of money on a weekend to see Steven Wilson in the Opera House in Copenhagen with Jakob. Well, I could not think of a better way to spend my money, other than with my wife, of course. He said quickly, but you get the drift. Me and my wife have also had this conversation, and we do lots of weekend breaks, which brings the two of us well-being. So spending money on experiences is, especially if those experiences involve social contact as well, that's a great way to increase your financial well-being.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. Certainly from the ladies that I coach. I mean, I do coach some men as well, and often in couples scenarios. But I would say predominantly that women tend to be better at spending money on socializing and community. And, it's important to us to feel like we're part of a community. But because often, it's statistically proven, isn't it, that men can often have more of a status-driven relationship with men than women. And that could be because of the way that society talks to men about money versus the way that society talks to women about money. Women are typically seen as the spenders, and men are seen as the ones who are that have the flash cars and the big houses, and it's all status driven and all based on power and success. So I'm sure that has an impact on the way that we spend our money.
It does, but it's stupid.
Completely ridiculous, right? Yeah. Why do we talk to men like that? Why do we talk to women like that?
And the phrase that we use to go through the heart of the book is "know thyself." And if you spend your time on money, work out what you want from life and spend your time on that. If you work out what makes you happy, it's not status. In fact, there's another great book called Hypercapitalism by Tim Casser, which is actually a comic book all about behavior economics. It's brilliant. And in that, he shows that if you have the value of thinking that accumulating stuff is a good thing, you will be unhappy. He's done decades of research on this. So if you're somebody that feels you need a personalized number plate, I pick on that one because it's a particular bee in my bonnet. Personalized number plates, basically to me, is a way of saying the world that you're not giving enough to charity.
I hope my dad's not listening to this.
But I would almost...
He's in Australia. It's a different time zone. It's fine.
I would almost go as far as saying is that personalised number plate will be making you unhappy because you're comparing yourself with other people. And
yeah, I mean, it's comparatitis, comparing the, keeping up with the Joneses is a tough one.
It's well known.
People.
It's well known to be. We never compare ourselves with people who've got less than us and think, aren't we doing well? We all...
Yeah. And we never compare ourselves with who we were yesterday. Who were you yesterday and who are you today and who will you be tomorrow? I always think that's a better benchmark than comparing yourself with anybody else.
I've been doing talks and workshops and keynote speeches, all sorts of stuff for years on this. And a little while ago, one of my acquaintances sold his business for quite a lot of money. And he told me at a party, quietly, I've got 4 million quid in my current account. And I went away that weekend and I got the right hump. If I had 4 million quid, the good that I could do. I mean, honestly, the stuff, there's a whole conversation we can have about record labels that I want to set up. And then it affected me. And then on Sunday night, I just suddenly hit myself on the head and said, what are you doing? Him having 4 million quid in his current account makes no bearing on you whatsoever. So what's it got to do with you?
Well, you can support your record label.
It's completely irrelevant to your life. Good on him. I've never had any problem with it. But there was just an element of me going, why haven't I? Why aren't I? Well, actually, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But I like to think I'm above these things. Like, I'm not,
So when you talk through these, so it's career, financial,
physical,
community, social, and physical. That was the other one. Okay. So how would you even begin to understand which of those areas are you perhaps spending some of your time in, or where would you begin with those areas? I'm trying to get that balance.
Well, I think I guess you look at one of them and see how it's affecting the others. So you take financial, for example. How are you spending your money to support your community well-being? Community is kind of wider social family as well as your literal, where you live, etc. I set up a local youth cricket section about 7 years ago. There was no youth section in my village, and where I live in Somerset, and I love my cricket. I wanted my kids to play cricket, so I set something up. We've now got 110 kids coming down on a Friday night. We've got 10 coaches, and I'm basically not needed anymore. And that gives me huge well-being. To go down there and have a beer and look at 100 kids running around the field having a good time playing, that gives me massive well-being. And it's not about people coming on and patting you on the back, because, well, they don't, frankly. You don't do that for those reasons. You do it because it's for the benefit of community. So if you've got an attitude in life that, you want to put your big fence up and shut the door and keep the world out, that is not a way to make yourself happy.
And I guess just listing those things out. I mean, when you were talking earlier about what makes you happy, what makes you unhappy, I've literally on my piece of paper in front of me written out what makes you happy on one column, what makes you unhappy on the other, and drawn a line down it. And that could be a simple thing that people can do to think about. Well, in those 5 areas, career, financial, community, social, and physical, what areas are you contributing towards that's making you happy, and what areas is not making you happy?
Yeah, I would agree. However, I would offer a word of warning. So there's of financial well-being. There are 5 parts, and one of them is having financial options. And if you say to somebody financial options, what are you able to do? What aren't you able to do? They will list the things that they think they are able to do and think that they aren't able to do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are the things that you can and can't do, because there's this concept called coaching concept called self-limiting beliefs. So it's I can't do this because of that happening. Well, what if that didn't happen? How can we? There's a wonderful interviewee I'd recommend it to you on our podcast called Marina Deva, and she got in. Well, actually, her husband got her into a massive 6-figure amount of debt, and she paid it off in 2 years, and she paid it off by working. I mean, there was a number of things that she did, but she also got a second and a third job. So sometimes we also have. We believe we can't do things. We think we're stuck in what we've got. We think that the life that we currently lead is the only life that's available to us. We can do bloody anything we want.
Yeah, it's challenging some of those beliefs. And that would be, I guess, the next step, wouldn't it? To see, well, if something's making you unhappy, is it you that's making you unhappy?
Absolutely.
Do you need to change your thought process, your belief system?
Is massive here. So when I went to go to take that 1 day a week off work, I needed to get permission to be happy. I realized this afterwards. I needed permission. I was a dad. I have kids. My wife works, but I'm the main breadwinner. I'm used to supporting the kids. I didn't think I was allowed to be happy. And I don't mean that in a get your violin out kind of way. It's just true. It didn't occur to me. And then I took some coaching myself, and we worked out that what was making me a bit depressed was not writing. So we came up with this plan of taking Wednesdays off, and I was really worried about this. And I went to my wife and I said, "What do you think?" She said, "Yeah, of course you should. What a great idea." And then I went to my then employees, and I said to one of them particularly, I said, "I've got this idea. What do you think? I'm really worried it might have a negative effect on everybody." And she said, "Well, Chris, we all work part-time. Why shouldn't you?" And it was just a light bulb moment. I went, "Oh yeah."
So was that the permission?
Yeah. And it was only afterwards, when I deconstructed this a little bit with the coaching, that I realized I was seeking permission from my family and permission from the employees. And I was seeking permission to be happy, to spend a little bit of time thinking about myself. Now, of course, I'm not a massive fan of the expression, "I need some me time." it feels a little bit inward looking, but I get the idea. We do need to take a bit of time, maybe some planned time, to say, I want to do the things that are going to give me purpose. I don't mean I want to go and do the things that make me relax. Yes, of course, there's a bit of that too. But the bit that most people, in my experience, don't spend their time on is their own purpose. So maybe you should have purpose time. I just made that up.
I like that a lot. Yeah. That's great. You can write a book about it, Chris. So what are these 5 stages of financial well-being that you've just referred to that are well documented?
The first one is having a clear path to identifiable objectives. So that, if you like, is having a plan. Spend, work out what you want from life, spend your money on that, having a clear path to identifiable objectives. The second one is then to get control of daily finances. So that will be something I'm sure you have discussed a lot on your podcast, and we'll be getting control of daily finances. Then it's having the ability to cope with a financial shock. So that's having the right protection in place, some emergency funds and so forth. The third is having financial options in life. And then the fifth one is clarity and security for those that we leave behind.
So clear path, financial control of our money,
having options,
dealing with financial shocks, options,
clarity for those we leave behind.
And clarity. And does it follow that logical? Do you literally start at step 1 and work your way to step 5?
No, I don't think you have to. I do in the book, obviously, because you've got to follow a path. But it depends which one you need most help with. Here's an interesting thing. At the Penny Brohn Cancer Centre, this blows my mind. My wife tells me this, and also Dr. Catherine Zolman, the lead practitioner there, tells me this, that people who have a cancer diagnosis often, obviously after a due period, but often report an increase in their well-being. And I just think that is so revealing. So if you take your time to go through those 5 areas to get control, realize what's important, get things sorted out, clarity for those that leave behind, so that you know that you're not leaving anybody worried and they're financially okay. And once you take those actions, which people who have a cancer diagnosis quite often, get things in order, they actually report an increase in well-being. And I just find that so revealing. That's
really powerful, isn't it? That says a lot about confidence and control and organization. In fact, the podcast episode that will be going out the week before yours, Chris, will be around the concept of having your finances in order, and what does that actually create? That creates a lot of financial order in other aspects of your life. But peace of mind is what people want, right? They want financial peace of mind, that they are going to be secure, their family is going to be secure. And I mean, in one of my earlier podcast episodes, I talked about financial shocks, and I myself had an awful experience in January of this year where I had the flu, and the flu turned into a nasty infection, and I was then in hospital for a week, and it essentially meant I was bedbound for 3 weeks. And I was fortunate enough that I had what I call my oh my god
Not
funds
fortunate,
that
Catherine,
I could rely on.
That was very deliberate.
Well, the oh my god fund was very deliberate, and in reality, I didn't have to actually use it anyway, because I had a private health insurance policy which paid out a small amount of money for having 7 days in hospital. But it's things like that we don't necessarily think about. It's that stage 3 that you talked about, the financial shocks. How do we protect ourselves so that we can maintain our lifestyle throughout any eventuality, whether it's being diagnosed with cancer, or whether it's 3 weeks in bed with the flu, or why is it that people don't necessarily like to plan for financial shocks?
Well,
do you think?
I mean, I'm sure you've had this. I remember people don't like to think of the worst, do they? I remember long time ago presenting a client said that they wanted some life insurance, so I presented, just went away and came back with a report, and at the end of it he said, "Thanks very much, but we've decided not to go ahead." And I said, "Oh, okay. Can I ask why?" He said, "Yes, I'm not going to die." Well, it really is literally no answer to that, is there?
What's well, give us your magic formula, and I'll make sure I follow that as well.
So no, people don't like to think of it sometimes, and I understand that. I can get that. But look, the truth of it is, Catherine, people go to financial advisors, financial planners. They go to them and give them all their money so that they don't have to look at it again. That's why there are some companies, our profession, who charge huge amounts more than other companies, because they promise a nice, safe pair of hands and you won't have to think about it anymore. And I'm in that category. I don't want to think about my money. I just want to get on and live my life, So if you can't afford those sorts of financial advisors, or if you want to spend a bit of time, you just need to spend a few hours getting a few things in order, and it will have a massive, and it will enable you to not have to think about your money anymore. And that's got to be the objective, isn't it? To make money, take it off the table completely so you can get on with your life.
It's really interesting, actually, because when you say that, I think I do want that, and I want that for my clients, but I do want them to have say so. Not that you're saying you don't want them to have say so in their finances, but I think people should be more financially aware and make more financial decisions for themselves and take more accountability for themselves, rather than necessarily just outsourcing it to somebody else. I'm not going to deal with it. You deal with it for me. I think there's a certain amount of accountability that people should have for their own finances. But you're absolutely right. By just making that decision to have that conversation, whether it's with your partner or a financial advisor or a coach or whoever that may be, to just create some time to deal with money. Because as you say, money isn't, it's not just the physical pounds.
But
it's what does it enable
takes
you
some
to
time
do
to deal with money in order that you then won't have to deal with it again until the next time, But it's like a horrible job that you like painting the fence. I've got to do it once a year, but when I do it, I know I won't have to do it again for a year.
Yeah.
So I saw a talk by a marketing guy a few years ago at a conference to a room full of financial advisors. And as a result of some legislative changes, which you and I know as RDR, he'd been contacted by his financial advisor, who was doubling his fees, and said, but rather than coming to see you once a year, I'm going to come and see you quarterly. And he said he'd replied to his advisor, I tell you what, double them again if you promise never to come and see me again.
Not to. I knew you were going to say
and
that.
I thought, yeah, that's actually what people want. They just want to be left alone, to get on with their lives and do the things that gives them purpose.
Yeah.
But to do that, there's a price to pay. Yeah. And that is a little bit of engagement with your finances.
Yeah, and that is all it takes. Yeah. It's small steps.
No one is suggesting that you should spend all your time analysing your bank statement. Your story about the lady
doing that.
Who, what did you call it when you take out a certain amount of money each week? Yeah, the envelope. See, personally, for me, I would absolutely hate that. Because I can understand why it works. Don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking it in any way at all. But for me, that means I'm constantly having to think about money. And I would rather work harder, make a little bit more money, so I don't have to think about it at all.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, gosh, I think in reality, it's about, you either look at how you can save yourself more money if you're spending too much, or you go out and earn more money. It's one of those two things, isn't it? I think where it can be really practical for people that perhaps are a little bit more fearful about actually tackling a spending problem.
It's a stage, maybe getting back on even keel. And so I'm not knocking it in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying that personally, I'd rather not spend my time thinking about my money that much. Well, yeah.
Just go and earn more of it. That's why. Well, that's why you're an entrepreneur, Chris, and a book writer, and a podcaster, and a serial business owner. So that's fabulous. So, just to wrap up on the show, then, Chris, is there anything else that you want to leave the listeners with today in terms of how they can get started to understand perhaps a bit more about their purpose in life, or a little bit more about where do they go from here? How do they start to create some financial well-being in their life? Anything else that you've
more of a wrap-up than anything else I haven't covered. I think it's because it's about purpose. Purpose is what makes you happy. Social contact is what makes you happy. So just spend a little bit of time talking. I personally, I think best when I talk. Talking to someone, it could be a partner, it could be a mate in the pub, about what makes you happy. There's a really good way of putting this. A guy called David Heiner, who's a very good speaker, gave me last year. He said, a goal is what you do during the day. Purpose is what gets you out of bed in the first place. So have a think about
nice. I like that.
what would make me excited. What would, not just happy, but excited. If I get to the end of the next 5 years, when I look back on it, what will make me think, that was awesome. Yeah, I feel really proud of what happened in those 5 years. And so that will start to help you think about not just what makes me happy or gives me well-being, but what gives me purpose. And then you can start to direct your finances around, how can I make that happen?
Yeah. Fabulous. I love that. So what's next for you then,
well,
Chris?
A nap, probably. I sold my business to something called an employee ownership trust and wrote a book called The Eternal Business about it. And I help companies, so business owners, to work out how they can transition their business to how they can exit in a way that leaves a legacy and gets their money out. So that's what I spend my time doing from a business point of view. The novel is almost finished first draft. So I'm really excited. I get to send it to my friend who always reads my first draft of novels to find out whether it's utter rubbish, which is what he said to the last one, whether there's something good in it, which I think there is a good one here.
And what's do you have a name for the book yet, or are we too early stages?
Yeah. Do you know what? That's a really tough one. It's about how the effect that the negative effect that our business leaders and our politicians have on our society. Oh, blimey, it'd be a little way.
And when's that due for release?
Probably. But a lot of work to do, which is what I enjoy doing.
Fabulous. Well, wonderful. Well, we'll pop a note in the show notes with a link to your existing book. So if anyone is listening who is a financial advisor, then we'll put a link in there to the Eternal Business, and then also a link to the Financial Wellbeing book. I was trying to dig it out actually off my shelf this morning in readiness for this interview, and I couldn't find it. And I know I've lent it to somebody, and now I'm like, who have I lent it to?
That's great news.
I need it back. So I know I might have to. Well, it's all supporting charity, so it's all a good cause. But thank you so much for your time, Chris. Is there any particular books, other than your own books, of course, that you would recommend to anybody listening that may be connected to financial well-being, or a book that maybe has been inspiring for you throughout your journey?
3 very quickly, if I may. I'd like to consider myself the owner of the largest collection of unread business books in the UK. So I'm looking at my bookshelf behind me, which has got 30 or so, and I'm thinking, actually, I've only read 3 of them. But the aforementioned Wellbeing by Rath, R-A-T-H, and Harter, that's really, really good on well-being as a whole. The book that changed my life was a book called The Long Walk by Slavomir Rabic, which is all about I'm not giving anything away because the title is there. Escaped from a Russian Siberian concentration camp or prisoner camp. 5 of them, and it's a true story. They walked across the Alps and the desert. And like I say, I'm not giving anything away because he wrote the book that he survives, But I finished reading that book on Rains Park train station about 20 years ago. And was in floods of tears sitting on the platform, and finished the book and just looked at myself and said, what are you doing in this crap job? You've got to do something more with your life than this. And it's what started everything off for me, that one. And then the third book is just my favorite novel. Fabulous. And it will make you happy, and it's called I Capture the Castle, by Dodie Smith, the writer of 101 Dalmatians, and it's just the most joyous story of a young girl and her dizziness in love, and it's just enchanting. I absolutely love that book. So for a book to just get you engrossed, I'd go for that one.
Lovely.
Long show notes.
I'll pop those in the show notes as well. Yeah, there will be long show notes. Well, we actually repurposed every podcast out as a blog so that people can go back and they can read it if they'd rather read it rather than listening to our voices. You can easily grab the show notes from that. So we'll pop the link into all of those. And then finally, do you have any favorite app recommendations for our listeners? Anything, doesn't have to be financially related, but
well, I use Words with Friends a lot,
now?
To be honest with you, but you're asking the wrong man for that kind of thing. It's a game, like
when you
Scrabble.
say you use words with friends, what do you mean?
I play that with a few people, so that's the one that gets open more than anything else. But no, I'm not really an app chap. I'm afraid you get on the tube and everybody's playing some game on their phones, and I'm sitting there with a paperback book. I know.
You traditionalist, you. And what about a Netflix recommendation or a series or something that you're watching right now?
Up to Heaven, with Ted Danson in it. We love that one. That one's been great fun. But I forgot what it's called now.
Oh.
Good Omens is coming, though. I'm a big collector of graphic novels, and Neil Gaiman is one of my favourite authors, and one of his books with Terry Pratchett was Good Omens, and that's about to come, I think, on Amazon. So very excited about what that's going to be like.
Oh, fabulous. Great. Lovely. Well, I'll pop a note to that too in the show notes. And thank you so much, Chris, for coming on. It's only taken us almost a year.
My pleasure. And Catherine, you keep up your good work, because spreading this sort of message out to people about let's focus on being happier, not just wealthier. This is doing really good stuff. So power to your elbow. Keep going.
Thank you very much. That means a lot. Thanks very much. Thank you for your time. And no doubt we'll hear from you again on the podcast in a later series. Thanks, Chris. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. This is kind of a wrap-up, really, of Series 1 of the In Her Financial Shoes podcast. So if you've enjoyed these episodes, please do feel free to leave me a review. It's very much appreciated. And if there's any particular topics that you want us to be talking about on the podcast, then pop me an email across at hello@themoneypanel.co.uk. That's hello@themoneypanel.co.uk. And give us your suggestions as to some of the topics that you'd like to hear more about in future series on the pod. Series 2, we're going to bring a whole ton of expert interviews and real life stories about investing. This is a topic that I feel particularly passionate about. And, coming into April, May, end of tax year is a really good time to be, thinking about whether you should be investing, what the benefits of investing are. And really what I want to do is to create an entire series built around building your confidence and knowledge about things like the stock market, the scary stock market, risk, and what does that actually mean, why we should be investing and why more women are not investing, what we can do about that. So really excited to bring that to you in April, and I will speak to you all again soon. Take care.